lovelies, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Heather, and this is the Happenings with H.A.P. H.A.P. meaning my initials. Welcome everyone. I hope that you have been enjoying the content so far this month. This is going to be a different type of video for me and my channel because I haven't been around long enough to do like these year-end type of wrap-ups. This is the first one I'm filming of that, and it's going to be the most controversial one of all, which is my bottom 5 books I've read in 2020. I'm expecting the first dislike I'm going to have on my channel. I'm expecting negative comments. I know a lot of these picks are going to be controversial for a lot of people, but they just weren't up there for me as far as what I've read all year so far. If you are new here, welcome. This is a very interesting video to first click on, but I hope you enjoy and that it doesn't turn you away. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down below. There's a lot more coming this month that won't be as negative as this video, though I'm trying not to make this video negative at all, but it's probably bound to happen regardless. So we're just gonna get into it because I don't think it makes sense to stall anymore. So here are my bottom 5 ranked books of 2020. So I'm going to preface this by saying I am very good at picking books to read that I know I will like. I will be including the ratings I gave these books on Goodreads, and you will notice none of them are very low ratings. The reason these 5 are the ones I picked is that they are my lowest rated books of the year. This critique is not based on the author's writing style or anything like that. I will happily read another book by any one of these authors, really. And in some cases, I have read other work that they've done and enjoyed them. So again, this has nothing to do with the authors themselves, like technical skills really at all. It's just my personal opinions and just how I did not connect to these books as much as I had hoped. I'm going to start from highest rated to lowest. That should give you an idea of how I'm going to go about this. The first book up is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I gave this one a 3.5 stars. I know a lot of people are going to be freaking out. Elizabeth Acevedo is an extremely talented writer. The way that this book is written is absolutely beautiful, and it's very short and sweet. It kind of almost borders on being a novella for how quickly it goes by, but it follows Xiomara, who grew up in a very strict religious household from her mother, and as she's grown older, she's kind of just trying to find her own voice and discovers she does have a talent for poetry, and so writes in a journal basically all her frustrations and feelings in the form of poetry as a way to kind of cope with her home life. She meets a boy named Aman, and they start to develop feelings for each other, but her mother can't really know about this because of her mother's strict upbringing. Unfortunately, her mother ends up finding out about all of this and does not take it well, let's just say. So I had 2 big issues, essentially. While it's well written, I'm just not the biggest poetry type of person. I don't really feel a huge connection to slam poetry or that world, so that part was a little bit lost on me. I did still connect with Xiomara as a character, and I thought she was very well thought out. My biggest issue, though, was really the ending and how the issues with Xiomara and her mother's own psychological issues were pretty much just wrapped up in a bow and everything was fine. That's something I've just found a bit unrealistic. I wish that this would have been a longer novel to explore that more, because Xiomara's mother is very abusive to her and also to her brother, but primarily to her because she is a woman and coming of age in modern day. I just wish there would have been more to flesh out at the end. Like, everything works out, it's wrapped in a bow, her relationship with her mother improves. I think for a lot of people, those types of issues wouldn't get fixed so quickly, especially because how her mother is so deeply rooted in her observance of Catholicism and basically felt like Xiomara's father basically raped her in order to have a family, and that she felt obligated to do this because she wanted to join the church. Like, that's a kind of mental type of victimhood, I guess you could say, that you're not going to get over, especially that quickly. So that was my biggest issue with it. It just felt like, okay, we got to this point, we need to have a happy ending, let's do this and we're done. It's just not very realistic. And I know, I read fantasy, I read shadow hunter novels and vampire novel and all this stuff, I get that. But the work itself is supposed to be rooted in pretty contemporary realistic fiction. But that's the only part of it that I just didn't really connect with because it just felt too simple. And I'm sure many kids and teens that read this book possibly might have felt the same, but the writing is so good and the world building and storytelling is so good that you kind of just gloss over it. But I guess some things sort of stick with me, and it bothered me enough that I definitely took away a star, which is what made it kind of be in my lower rated of the year. Like I said, it's not bad. That was my main point with it, is just the ending and the relationship between Xiomara and her mother just did not feel authentic to me. I know people are going to be really mad about this, but it's still 3.5 stars. I still enjoyed it. I would not read it again. It just didn't do much for me, and it kind of disappointed me in that way. I still enjoyed myself, but I just wouldn't pick it up again. Don't hate me. The next book on my list, it's technically the same rating, but I consider it a step below the Poet X, and I will explain why, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This one, my issue was I went into this with way too high expectations. The writing is very well done. The world building and all of that is phenomenal. It just felt very overhyped to me. I really loved If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which is also dark academia, so I assumed I would enjoy this type of dark academia too. And honestly, the story itself I did enjoy, like the whole plot of what ends up happening in the novel, I really enjoyed. This novel takes place in a New England very liberal arts college that has this ancient Greek language class taught by this professor that handpicks a very small select group of students and essentially isolates them from the entire rest of the college, in that all of their classes are with him. The new kid on the block, who is from a poor background, Richard, comes to the school and ends up becoming part of that group because he does have a very great understanding of Greek. And there's a murder amongst the group, and unfortunately the guilt associated with that and trying to cover up that murder ends up driving a wedge between all of them and basically causes a lot of issues. I don't want to give anything away for those that do want to read the novel. The actual plot and what happens is very interesting. My issue, beside me finding it a bit overhyped, is I just did not connect to the narrator or really pretty much any of the characters except Henry. I just didn't really care about these characters. I didn't care about the character that ends up getting murdered. I didn't end up really caring about the love interests involved. I enjoyed some of my time with these characters, but there was never really anyone I cared to root for, and especially since it's told through Richard's point of view, I should really be on his side, and I just wasn't. I don't know, like I just did not connect to these characters in particular. They were very fleshed out, flawed, realistic characters. I guess the best example I can use is Game of Thrones, where yes, all totally flawed, crazy characters, but you are able to pick out a few that you root for and follow. This, I'm just like, I just don't care about these people because they're all pretty terrible people and they really had no redeeming qualities at all that I really could care about. It was overly a bit long, so I also was just kind of, all right, when's the other shoe gonna drop? When's it gonna be kind of over? I don't want to say I was bored. Like, I read the audiobook version and it was well done, so I don't think it has anything to do with like the narration or anything like that. It just was not for me. I just didn't connect with these characters in this novel, and I know so many people that love dark academia like have this as like the pinnacle of that, and I'm bummed that I don't. I'm really bummed that I just don't feel that way about this novel. I rated it 3.5 stars. It just didn't connect with me was my biggest issue, and I think I went in way too hyped for it. And that's of no one's fault but my own. Sometimes that happens and you gotta try to quell it. It was disappointing in that I wish I enjoyed it more. I really did. The next book is one that I had talked about not too long ago actually in my November wrap up, and that one is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I rated this one 3 stars. This is another one where I think I went in just a little bit too hyped for and ended up a bit disappointed. This novel follows Noemi, who is sent by her father to visit with her cousin after her cousin has written these very cryptic, odd letters about being fearful for her life. This is all after her cousin has married an Englishman and kind of basically fell off the face of the planet, if you will, with contact with her former family in Mexico City. And so Noemi goes to High Place, which is the family's huge huge mansion in the Mexican countryside, and she begins to learn some secrets about the family that are threatening for both her and her cousin. My biggest issue with this one was, I guess, the supernatural elements that were introduced were kind of like fleshed out very oddly, in that I understood what was going on to a point, but I just felt it was kind of piecemealed together, and there's a lot more about what the family was doing that would have been a bit more interesting to explore. And I just didn't really care. I don't know. I know that the stakes were high for the characters in this. I did enjoy the characters. I think part of it too might have been the audiobook narration was not the best. It would be saying that the character was yelling, yet the audiobook narrator was still pretty much flat delivery. She wasn't the best audiobook narrator, not gonna lie, compared to a lot of others that I've read before. It's just like all this stuff happens, we learn the reason why it happens, and the ending is so very, monster of the week on Buffy or Charm type of a way to solve the problem that somehow no one thought of doing before. I don't know. I like the commentary on how it was kind of in the vein of Get Out, where white people are trying to use up people of color for their physical beings and their physical bodies. Like, I liked that exploration and the commentary that this was towards that. And I wish this would have explored that more instead of just being a supernatural element. It just fell flat for me. And I don't know. Like I said, I don't really know what else would have changed about it that would have made me like it more. Like I said, it was written pretty well. Maybe I might reread it again in the physical format and not via audiobook, because I don't know if that probably skewed how I felt about it. I also felt like the relationship was tacked on a bit, in that like there was a lot of PTSD this character would have, and to be in the relationship she's pursuing at the end of the novel just felt off for me. Again, I was disappointed that I didn't like it more. I went into it hyped, but not really knowing what it was going to be. So I definitely got satisfied with like the Gothic feel. Like the way it was written very much made the house itself a character, because it is. It pulled from, I felt, from a lot of different type of Gothic literature, but that's what it kind of felt like. It pulled from different things, but didn't make it as cohesive as it could. I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this one. It just wasn't for me, unfortunately, and I wish I liked it more than I did. The next book on my list is also rated the same as the last, but in my opinion, it's a step lower. Just didn't rate it a step lower because of certain other aspects to it. And that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I read this one more so because it was a classic and I wanted to get a better understanding of the source material when I watched The Haunting of Bly Manor. I can understand, based on when this was written, why it was the pinnacle of Gothic horror and the start of modern Gothic horror. I totally understand that with the way it's written. Not much happens in the novel, like at all. I know that that's to be left to the reader's interpretation, particularly what happens in the end. A lot of people like say when they read this, it's just like dialogue, 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 ghost, dialogue, 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 ghost, dialogue, dialogue, death. Like, that's pretty much how it goes. Because of how it's told, where a character is telling the story of another character who then takes over the point of view. So we are once removed from an unreliable narrator to another unreliable narrator. So as the reader, you don't really know what is real and what isn't. It's all based on speculation from the original person telling the story, but also speculation from the person telling the story of the person telling the story. There is that layer, which does make it interesting. It's a psychological piece of horror. It is interesting. But for 2020 eyes, it falls a little flat. Like, the ideas that it created and obviously have been adapted are very unique and interesting. It just kind of fell flat. Like, I love classics. It has nothing against this being a classic or that I only like modern literature, which is totally untrue. It's a novella that, if maybe fleshed out, would have been a bit more interesting, but there's just not much here because of the nature of how it's written. It spawned a lot of very interesting creativity from it, which is why I rated it so high, which I know 3 stars isn't super high, but that's why I rated it what I did, because of its influence on modern Gothic horror is unprecedented. And there's a point to that. If I would have read this back when it was written in the 19th century, oh yeah, I probably would have, lost my mind for it. But with how much I've read over time, it's impossible for it to have the same impact it could have had if I had originally read it and may not have known anything about it. And that's with any classic or any well-known piece of work. You automatically have an idea in your head about it, and trying to read it or watch it or whatever later on, it's really hard to keep that same level of enthusiasm. Was this bad? No, I gave it a 3 stars. Would I read it again? No, I don't really need to at all. It's definitely not one I'm going to revisit. Not terrible, but meh for me. It was meh. The last book on this list is probably going to be the biggest source of anger for a lot of people of all, especially on BookTube. So I'm ready for it. I'm ready. I've talked about it before, and it was my most disappointing read of the year, and that is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. I gave this 3 stars. However, barely edged by. I really debated giving it a 2.5 stars. So this novel is a spin-off to Rainbow Rowell's previous contemporary work, Fangirl, which I am a huge fan of. I gave that one 5 stars. And this novel is supposed to be the fan fiction, a Harry Potter-esque type of character fan fiction, essentially supposed to be slash fan fiction, that Kath was writing in that novel. So she basically took the ideas from that and put it into here. For Harry Potter readers that may not have read this, think a Harry Draco slash fan fiction, and you'll get the idea of what this is supposed to be. The biggest issue was that this is essentially supposed to be the final book, if you will, of her fan fiction. Like with Harry Potter, this pretend series is supposed to have many books. There's a whole backstory to this world that the fan fiction that it is assumes the reader should know, but because that world doesn't actually exist, it's just kind of pushed into the novel throughout. So you're kind of left, at least I was, struggling to understand how the magic system in this novel works, how the relationships between each of the characters is supposed to have been developed over all these years that are supposed to have happened in the original work, and it just does not work because you don't have this background. It's literally like if you went into a Harry Potter fanfiction without ever reading any of it, you might get some ideas about it, but you don't really know the magic system. Because of copyright issues, the magic system in this novel is just all over the place and weird, and again, doesn't really make sense. I did not get any sense of world building from this novel. Like, I think that this is the only type of fantasy piece that Rainbow Rowell has ever written. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. There's none of that rich world building at all because it basically thinks that you should know this already because of the nature of the story that is written. It just was a total letdown. As a character, I really enjoyed Baz. That was like the high point, and he basically kind of saved my rating for this. Again, it would have been much lower. Like, I'm still even now thinking I probably should have rated it a 2.5 just because of how much I was just not caring about what happened. The only reason I really like Baz is because he had a character arc. The rest of the characters didn't. I guess their character arc already occurred. I don't know. The romance in it between Baz and Simon just didn't work for me. It didn't feel natural. I don't know. I just did not enjoy this, and it was a struggle to finish. And I just kept thinking, I kept hoping, oh, maybe it'll get better. Maybe I will see why people love this so much. And it's like, I don't know if people love it because of the slash fan fiction-y type of vibe to it, if that's why it's so popular on BookTube, because there are way better gay romance fiction out there that I've read this year alone that are just 10 times better than this novel. And I know it has a sequel, and the sequel was on my TBR, kind of still is, just because, you know, things sit there on Goodreads forever, but I don't think I'm ever going to read it because this book turned me off to it, and I just don't care. I was so excited to read this. I really was. I was very disappointed in it, and it's unfortunate because it's like what it could have been. It just wasn't as fleshed out, and like I said, I adored Fangirl, so I know I probably would really enjoy other novels by Rainbow Rowell, but like this series just wasn't it for me, and this book just turned me off to the series as a whole. There's so many other books that I want to read in the world, and it's not one of them, unfortunately, but I really thought I was gonna love it, but I did not, and I don't understand the hype for it at all. Like, The Secret History, I can understand the hype for. I can understand the hype for Mexican Gothic, for sure. Like, both of them, I can understand why people really love them. This, I don't understand why people like this book. So those are my lowest rated bottom 5 of 2020. I know not all of them came out in 2020, so these were just the ones that I read this year that let me down and were disappointing. Again, I know that there's going to be comments on this one that definitely disagree with me, and I know I love things that I'm sure most people disagree with, so 100% I can totally understand why you may disagree with me. I'm happy to discuss any of these novels if you would like to discuss your love for them and why you love them. them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I didn't make too many of you mad, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.